This is Living Catholic with Father Don Wolf. Living Catholic is a fresh look at issues confronting each of us today. This show deals with living Catholic, what that means for Catholics, as well as the impact on the rest of society. You certainly don't have to be Catholic to enjoy this show. And now your host, Father Don Wolf.
Welcome, Oklahoma, to Living Catholic. I'm Father Don Wolf, pastor of Sacred Heart Parish and rector of the Shrine of Blessed Stanley Rother. Just the other day, I ran across a series of articles about a situation in Italy capturing a headline for a time. It's about witchcraft and black magic, which is on the rise in the land of grand opera, great pasta, and silly politics. Consorting with the dark side has now become newly fashionable in the Mediterranean, even as Italians have become more educated, more financially stable, and have more time on their hands than ever before. Maybe it's something we ought to think about. But first, a reminder from a movie. Remember the scene in the film Moonstruck where the star, Cher, is seeing off her fiancé who's going to visit his mother in Sicily? Her fiancé boards the plane and Cher stands dutifully looking at it push away from the gate. An older woman is standing there next to her, speaking in clipped and angry tones in her Sicilian dialect as the plane rolls out to the runway. Cher asks what she's doing and she says, "I'm putting a curse on someone." Cher then pauses for a moment and says to the older woman, "I don't believe in curses." The older woman looks at her and says, "Neither do I." It's a funny moment, and intended to be so. It's supposed to conjure up in us the notion of those Italians who've always mixed up their visions of the supernatural and swirled in the primitive gods of their ancestors with the purity of their Catholic faith. We're supposed to laugh because it's so typical of those people. The joke would never come off if it were a Lutheran grandmother seeing off her neighbor in Bismarck or St. Paul. No one expects her to be cursing in an incomprehensible German patois so that she'll win the lottery or spoil her neighbor's bread recipe or ruin her girlfriend's romance. Italians, though, now, they're different. We all know what they say about them, or at least we've heard about what they say concerning them over the last couple of 100 years or so. They're the ones who cast for spells or believe in the thickness of the moment, enough to placate whatever primitive deities might be lurking there. And the news these days seem to bear out this prejudice. According to Catholic World News, an entire industry has been resurrected in Italy that provides seers and witches for those who seek out some meaning in their complicated modern lives. In this reporting, Italians are now consulting a record number of people who provide solace and explanations in the face of the growing confusions and difficulties of life these modern Europeans face in our time. What may have been normal for their great-grandfathers, or more likely their great-grandmothers, and disappeared with education and prosperity, has now been resurrected. This is, of course, an item of concern for the life of the Church in Italy. Actually, it's an explicit account of what concerns the leaders of the Church in the parts of the Western world in which adherence to the belief and practice of the Church has waned, but the thirst for transcendence has not, which is to say, everywhere. We can count on Northern Europeans to keep these things to themselves until they're captured by some crazed leader or go running after some newly popular professor who names what they've all been secretly thinking. But Italians, they're different. They live out in the open and talk about what those of the frozen North guard in silence. And those Italians are speaking up. Apparently, these Southerners are turning out in record numbers to seek the occult, going to seers and witches as a solution to their spiritual ennui. If they're doing it as the open, explicit representatives of Europeandom, then what might everyone else be up to? That's the subtext of the article. It's why the news has made an impact. And by the way, the heart of these practices is not in lowly Sicily, where the mafia and the local gods have roots deep enough that modern life has never been able to pull up. From the beginning of the formation of the country of Italy, the North has been the place of sophistication and progress in education, while the poor South, especially Sicily, has been the locus of everything awful from child brides and tribal feuds to drug trafficking and sex slaves. When the group of Italian states were being hustled together to carve out a nation from the various languages and cultures and histories that had been in place in the peninsular boot of Italy for the previous 1,500 years, it took a lot of convincing to have the North include the South as part of the same country. Although nation forming was all the rage at the time, creating Germany out of the mess of duchies and kingdoms that had formed the German-speaking lands for millennia, and striving to eke out modern states out of places like the Balkans and the Middle East, where no such thing had ever existed previously, and national borders were put on maps at the whim of politicians who had no more notion of what a country was than they had for what pantyhose might be for. The people of the northern Italian lands were skeptical. Making one country out of variegated people in the boot of Italy seemed outlandish. When asked why their nationhood on the peninsula south of Rome and the island of Sicily should be part of the country called Italy, they said, "Why chain yourself to a corpse? There is no love lost between north and south in Italy." Yet it is in Lombardy that the place where the record number of people are going over to the old spirits, looking for something missing in their lives, is. Lombardy is northern Italy. It's the prosperous, modern, educated, sophisticated part of the country. Peasants in their hovels or behind their donkeys are not the ones lining up to have tarot cards read or their auras checked. It's the accountant at the international firm or the stewardess on the twice-a-week flight to Beijing. They're the ones making the appointment with their local warlock on their iPhones to see about a decent love potion or a propitious day for vacation, and they pay them all by credit card. According to the report, this is the center of the alternative quest for spirituality among the Italians these days. The modern Lombardy of Fiat, Alitalia, Beretta, Ferrari, and Prada. That's the place where the thick world of the supernatural is breaking in on postmodern imaginations. And it's not some clique fad either. These folks are spending 8 billion euros on their spiritual consultations. Just for a comparison, that's about what the country of Mexico spends on its military. It's double what Nigeria spends on its army and its air force. That is to say, 8 billion euros is not nothing. Not only that, this new preoccupation with the powers of this world involves 10 to 13 million clients. That, too, is not nothing. And these reports make for some serious reflection. What's going on there? More importantly for us, what's going on here? After all, in our interconnected world, in which a bomb blast at a toll station in, Kazakhstan can be made national news in 30 seconds, and in which an international pandemic can disappear from the news overnight, there's no such thing as an isolated fact. We have every right to wonder about what's happening somewhere else and whether it will touch us or not. If this happens in sophisticated Brescia and Bergamo, what about downbeat Oklahoma City or out-of-tune Tulsa? These reports are all the more interesting because of where we find ourselves these days. For centuries, we've been surrounded by those who have complained that the church has to update itself in the face of the revolution of evidential thought and clear understanding. The logic about that is familiar to all of us since we've all been educated in its household. It goes something like this. Since nobody believes in all those things the church teaches anymore, like a virgin birth or the resurrected hero or the miracles and the healings of Jesus, not to mention the infallibility of the Pope and the beauty of virtue, the church needs to update itself and get in line with science and modernness and rationality in all the things that the people know to be true. And if it doesn't, the church will never survive in our world of sophistication and deep intelligence. The eon of the superstitious peon is over. The age of the cognoscente has begun. Unless the church wants to be left behind by those who are educated and informed, it'll have to begin its work to update and relate soon. And it won't be easy, they say. In fact, it's probably already too late. That's what people have been saying for 200 years. It's an old story, of course. When I was in the seminary, we were being warned that the age of the expert pastor amid ignorant parishioners was going by the board. It used to be that Father was recognized as the ultimate authority, since he was educated and knowledgeable, not only about church matters, but about the wide world, while the average parishioner was hemmed in by work and worry and knew almost nothing about sophisticated topics. We had to give up on this notion, we were told. We would be surrounded by people who were smart and informed about all kinds of things. Father expert was a thing of the past. And I agree. The old formulations were out of date. Any priest who presumes on his authority and his knowledge now has to face the fact that anybody can get a copy of the general instructions on how to say Mass or the Code of Canon Law. from the internet and go toe-to-toe with Father's knowledge and interpretation. Father says is as obsolete as Father knows best. But it ain't quite the case that we priests quail in the shadows of the hyper-educated. Lots of people know lots of things, but the things of value and the choices for good in daily life are still often as unknown and unavailable even to the educated as the theory of star formation or the formula for compound interest. And of course, we watch this urgency to redirect the thinking of the church amid the irony of watching people, by the many hundreds of thousands, according to the polls, to go to consult those who read tea leaves and cast spells and cleanse auras. Were these choices by so many of the educated and the elite not so seriously wrong, it might even be a time for laughter. Alas, laughter doesn't quite describe the outcomes here. First of all, those who turn to the ancient gusts of spiritual energy haven't found what they're looking for in the church. And while this may sound like I'm whining about having lost out to those who aren't on my side in the things of the Spirit, it's actually much more dire than that. Which is to say, the human thirst for the transcendent is irrepressible and will spring up wherever people are. If the regular pathways to satisfaction are not available, sideways access will be opened. People are going to find what they're looking for somehow. It may be a lesser version, an odd take, or a meager portion of what they have the right to expect, but they're going to get it. And we know without a doubt, people long for meaning and have to have a direction greater than the limits of their lives. And because they do, they'll be restless until they find it. How do we know? Because as a society, we've spent the last 150 years looking for it just about everywhere we can. When thinkers began to convince people their adherence to Christian faith and the Catholic Church was inadequate to their real needs, which began to happen slowly beginning in about 1750, but like a whirlpool begins to pick up speed the longer you are swept up by it, it began to tell in earnest in the 1880s. And when it began to sweep away the quiet peasant confidence in God and his purposes, people began looking intently under every rock and in every book. All of Europe turned first to the authority of the state, which brought us World War I, and then to the transcendence of the collective, which brought us World War II, and then to the élan of excess, which brought us to the sexual revolution. We're now focused on the dissolution of humanity so as to find escape from the constraints of living, which brings us to transgenderism, eugenics, and euthanasia, often gathered together under the banner of transhumanism. It's a dire history, and the arc of suffering has touched the whole world. True, it all happened under the veneer of Christian belief, and now we're prying off that cover and getting to the substance of things, so at least the folks in Lombardy are being honest. But still, that won't make things better. I grieve at this report because things will only get worse. You see, secondly, there are some things to know about transcendence and a few things to know about the gods and the spirits of this world. Let's take these concerns in reverse order. When we encounter our hunger for what's larger than the mere boundaries of our lives, we're often not very discriminating. Become hungry enough and we'll end up gorging ourselves on what's not good for us. And like all those times when you get too much of what you don't really want, it leads to a dull sense of satisfaction that passes quickly, and then it opens the door to our next binge. Pretty soon we give up the idea of real satisfaction and just go with what's next. Look around at those folks you know who seem to be content with Oreos and ice cream in quantity. Are they the ones you'd trust to give an intricate assessment of a slice of beef Wellington and hollandaise sauce? Or are they so dulled by what they're so used to, they hardly even care to find out how good things can really taste? Most of the time, unless we hold out for the best, we're seduced into the worst. And oddly, there seems to be little in between. And it works the same with our other hungers. Become tired of the work involved to have even a minor version of what's good for you, and pretty soon you're content with the least. So when we give up on the church's hope that our souls might be fine-tuned to the gift of God's goodness, revealed in self-sacrificing love, then we'll gorge ourselves on what feels good at the moment until we're dulled into imagining there is nothing else but our feelings. And if we stimulate the feeling sense over and over, it becomes numb. Once that happens, All we're left with is bulk or quantity. After a while, we'll opt for almost anything as long as there's a lot of it. Remember that 8 billion euro number. When we stoop to the lesser, we end up with the least. That's the great problem. The follow-on is that once we stoop to begin serving the gods of this world, we do so only because we've forgotten what it means to serve God at all. And the first lesson in serving is that all gods are jealous. They only want everything. We know what the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wants, ourselves. And we push back because this seems unreasonable and unsupportable in our desires to be free and to become our own true self. But since each small God invites us beyond the limits of our lives, we are intrigued by what we can find there. And since the small gods are not expressions of truth, they lie to us. And what they lie about at the beginning is that we are free to engage them at no price to us. Eventually, we'll find out that they demand loyalty in everything. That's what those who now pursue them in frivolity will find out when their engagement becomes frozen. We might speculate, what will the world come to when the silly minor gods that used to be found in the forest and the fireplace are now flitting among success and succor, when they want every part of our loyalty and observance? They'll find that these powers demand everything from those who follow them. I suppose the answer is already formally offered. It's just that the folks in Europe haven't been paying attention. Because Italy, like most of Western Europe, began offering its young to the gods of prosperity and pleasure more than 40 years ago when abortion was legalized. Millions upon millions have been offered up in the name of goodness and modernity. There is no nation in all of Europe that has a birth rate that will reproduce itself. Every country there is declining in population. Apparently, there is no desire in any country to sustain itself. Italy is one of the least fertile places in the world. And if you Google abortions in Europe, the first thing you'll find is the European Council's warning that there aren't enough abortions in Europe currently, which is a chilling reminder that it appears no one on the continent wants their country to continue. The gods, with a small g, just want everything, including the future. What's left when you've already sacrificed your own children to the hungry clutches of the gods who want them? Apparently, nothing's left. That sounds counterintuitive. Our hunger for what is beyond us ought to lead us to the first truth beyond us, which is the future generation we can found and sustain. But if we're convinced this is a danger to our autonomy and our freedom, if we link ourselves to the uncertain investment in a commitment to a spouse and a family, then we'll opt for another kind of transcendent reality if we don't trust that. And this is what has happened. Italy is in the throes of surrender to the gods of this world, who have led their adherents to the small energies of romance, success, revenge, or certainty. By enticing their adherents with these shiny baubles, they've led them away from the great transcendent glory of new life, new hope, and a new generation. Because if you surrender God, you get gore, or maybe just geriatrics. That's where they've gotten in Italy, and in all the rest of the Western world, including here at home. We're not exempt from this scenario. But that's only the lead up to the real concern about transcendence, and it's this. When we've turned away from the source of transcendent reality beyond ourselves and have opted for what is less than all we want, we're left hungry for more. As T.S. Eliot described it, we're famished by the craving. Since no one can't get too much of what he doesn't really want, no matter where he goes, he still longs to be satisfied. So spirit guides and astral projections and eternal journeys, none of them will be enough because none of them will be self-escaping enough. Eventually, even the most assiduous society searching for meaning will end up in the only place that can't be escaped, which is death. No one can escape that encounter with the greater than me truth than that my life will flicker and then go out. Death is the one transcendent experience that can't be dodged. And we've already arrived. Already the Western world throughout Europe, Canada, Australia, and coming to the U.S. has adopted the fetish of aid in dying. Euthanasia is growing throughout the nations of Europe and has now become a part of the landscape of the culture there. not only in dying, but also in killing. A confidential Dutch report from several years ago indicated that doctors regularly lie about how many people they euthanize, and that as many as 40% of those who avail to extinguish themselves are being extinguished involuntarily. After all, when confronted by the transcendent promise that I have the power to overcome the ultimate limitations of my life by ending my life, and thus demonstrate my power over my own being, the temptation to exercise that power by ending another's life is the next step. And when there's no longer the service to the one God, or the pursuit of the real truth, or the discipline of the true self, then all that's left is power. And there's no power as intoxicating as facilitating the death of others. And there's nothing more powerful than having another die at your own hand. While this sounds surprisingly monstrous among the quietness of Northern European states and their pursuit of the quality of life, it is completely monstrous nonetheless. Pursuing transcendence can be deadly. False promises prompted the bloodbath of the 20th century, and we can only tremble at what the 21st century holds. Which is why this particular bit of news concerning what's going on in Italy is such a terror to us all. Whatever happens across the pond, especially in the capital of fashion and glamour, which is Milan, the capital of Lombardy, is only just in front of us here. What happens there is only the presage of what happens here. Once we leave God behind, it's only one mere generation before the gods arrive to interject themselves into our pieties. And if there are millions of adherents in Italy and billions of dollars invested there, think of the potential here. We already know how much we've debased ourselves by surrendering our future generations. It beggars the imagination to wonder what we might do if we step up to serve the demons of the air. Our hope is to turn to the God of all hope and to offer to serve Him. His is the only promise that we will receive that will involve more than we give and be enlivened more than we are diminished. I don't want to diagnose the maladies of Italy when it comes to the faults of the church there. Suffice it to say, only a return to the promise of Jesus present in the church will there be a rebirth of hope on the Lombardy plains or among the peoples of the West. Now is the time for all of us to become disciples. Think of what we could accomplish. We have the chance to witness to those who have been anxious and turned away because the church asks for money to support its proclamation of freedom in Christ, and who now throw their lives and the lives of their offspring at the gods who demand only everything. Has there been a better time to preach the good news? I don't think so. It awaits just us to do it. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to our final segment, Faith in Verse. We have a poem today called In the ICU. She's 18, her grandmother sobbed. Through her tears she grasped. Breathless, her head bobbed, a muted imitation of genuine desire to pray, to reason in the midst of this fire. Searing, this woman, her grandchild in her grasp, life's ransom paid out in suffering's hard cash. Pray for us, O Father, pray for this family here. We're not together, not yet, not now, I fear. The child, she never moved, was still as stone. The tubes and lines made her seem even more alone. And time carried her away in an hour or two, leaving us all to face what we all in life lose. Trust in the beauty and the power of youth, a candle flame unable to sustain and soothe. That's In the ICU. Back here next week with another opportunity to explore what it means to be living Catholic. I hope you can join us then.
Living Catholic is a production of Oklahoma Catholic Radio. To learn more, visit okcr.org.